Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I am Hugh McKay, President of the Board of Directors of the City Club. The influence of money in politics and government and the need for transparency has been a major issue in this country throughout our history. In 1902, Teddy Roosevelt declared that if the influence of money in politics is not exposed and controlled, quote, there will come a riotous, wicked, murderous day of atonement, unquote. In 1965, Bob Dylan sang about how in politics, money doesn't talk, it swears. Concerned citizens in the past did not have the internet available to address this money transparency problem. But our speaker today, Ellen S. Miller, has effectively harnessed information technology to address this age-old issue. Ellen Miller is co-founder and executive director of the Sunlight Foundation, a nonpartisan Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit dedicated to using the power of the internet to catalyze government openness and transparency. Ms. Miller is co-founder of two other prominent Washington-based organizations in the field of money and politics, the Center for Responsive Politics and Public Campaign. She is nationally recognized as an expert on transparency and the influence of money in politics, and she has been widely celebrated for her work for good government and to improve public confidence in government. In national publications, she has been called a tech titan and one of the 15 people the next president should listen to. Please welcome Ellen Miller.
Thank you for that kind introduction. Unfortunately, no president seems to ever really want to listen to me, but it was a great honor to be named as such. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here and to be part of the history of this wonderful institution. So thank you so much for inviting me to join you. I am executive director and co-founder of the Sunlight Foundation. We're Washington, D.C. based, a nonprofit that was designed just 5 years ago to use the power of the internet to catalyze greater government openness and transparency. We take our inspiration from Justice Brandeis's powerful adage that sunlight is said to be the best of disinfectants. We're committed to improving access to government information by making it available online. Indeed, redefining public information as meaning online. And we do this by creating databases, new tools, and resources for doing so, for putting all this online. And we do this by working with passionate citizens all around the country, online and offline, to transform this information from lots of numbers into information that we can use to be better partners in democratic governance. The digital world in which we live allows us, in fact, it encourages us, almost demands, that we have a different kind of relationship with our government, between government and the citizens who elect them. The technology challenges our social contract with government, in fact, what it means to be a citizen. With the white noises of headlines that are always flashing about abuses of power across the country at every level, it's easy to tune out the power for changing that, for reform. But really, what we're looking at is a revolution that would empower citizens in ways that have never happened before. The feeling of powerlessness that often results when you see those headlines is the kind of powerlessness or the feeling you get when accountability only comes after the deed is done. That's old school, last century accountability. The goal of working for open government is to turn this feeling of powerlessness into something that is proactive. Releasing government data in human and machine-readable formats means that we, the people, can actually examine the information for ourselves, that we can be more self-reliant, but also more informed and helpful partners in our democracy. At Sunlight, we believe that embracing transparency is a critical way for our government and its officials to restore trust in its institutions, in our institutions and in them. Transparency has become the new objectivity. Just think about the times we live in. It's a world where, if we want to, we can download a book to read at 2 a.m. from our bed. Or we can make a plane reservation more easily ourselves than talking with an airline agent. You can ask me about that later. Or you can find a cute new pair of shoes online and wear them tomorrow. So what does this mean in terms of our political world? It means that you can use technology to follow our petitions' every word and thought on Twitter. Sometimes this doesn't work out so well. Or you can follow the legislation they introduce or the campaign money they take in as real time as it's made available. We can ask them when they come home for a town meeting or on their Facebook page if the campaign money they have taken has influenced their votes, and if not, why did they ever vote for that piece of legislation that is not in their constituents' interest? There are much tighter connections now between politicians and us as citizens. Technology is core to this work and to the new level of engagement that's now possible. We work on the principle, as my colleague Andrew Richet from the Personal Democracy Forum has said, that technology is not just a slice of the pie, it's actually the pan. Today, we expect information to be fully available 24/7, and we expect technology to allow us to engage with our friends, our coworkers, and our communities. We expect to use technology to give us access to information about our elected officials, about our government at large, about corporate and labor union behavior, and about all the data that government collects. 54% of adults use the internet for political purposes during the 2010 midterm elections. That's some 73% of all adult users. And in the last election, 1 in 5 online adults used Twitter or social networking sites for political purposes. 1/4 of all adults got most of their news from the last election, about the last election, online. And the proportion of Americans who are getting their news online about the midterm elections has grown more than threefold since 2002. New technology is changing the power dynamics of politics, shifting power to the edges and opening up closed systems in almost all aspects of the political process. On the federal level, the Sunlight Foundation has been a driving force of that change. The tools that we use to take public data and make it truly accessible are numerous, and I want to talk about just 2 or 3 of them today to give you an example. One of them is called Influence Explorer, a one-stop web resource showing an overview of campaign finance, lobbying, earmark, government grants and contracts, contractor misconduct, and federal spending data for all the organizations, people, and industries who are influencing our government. Although anyone can see and download records from databases online, Influence Explorer makes that data easy to understand with simple data visualization and a single search through a myriad of these databases. Making data digestible is a form of transparency in its own right. We built several tools on top of Influence Explorer with the goal of bringing this data out of the dark and into the places where it's contextually useful. So imagine you're reading a press release or a news article. You can look at our website called polygraph.com, and this lets you filter the entire news article through this enormous database that we have, and it produces a visually appealing analysis of the political picture, if you will, of the entities named in that article right next to where you're reading it. It's really quite a jaw-dropping tool that we've developed. Making this kind of information isn't just an exercise, I should add, in gotcha politics, although it has been useful in uncovering questionable activity, but it also helps citizens become more involved in holding government accountable. With another one of our projects that deals with the contextualizing of information, this one's called Sunlight Live. We've taken the idea of citizen participation to a new level. Sunlight Lives lets you see information about political spending and lobbying as you watch a live-streamed event a live streaming of a public event. It's a thought-provoking experience. Sunlight's reporting team runs this project, allowing you, the viewers, to participate and understand in the context how decisions are made. Our reporters watch with you, helping you make sense of the event as they unfold through a conversational live blog. Our first live blog we did in February 2010 of the Bipartisan Healthcare Summit. Over 42,000 people watched that with us, 10,000 of them talking with us on our blog as we provided information about healthcare contributions, the role of lobbyists in the healthcare debate. Let us talk a little bit now about policy. In the 21st century, government is transparency only when public information is online. The Sunlight has helped to develop and supports a piece of legislation called the Public Online Information Act that's been introduced into the House and the Senate that embraces this new formula for transparency. If passed, no longer would antiquated government disclosure practices bury public information in out-of-the-way offices and in outmoded formats. The law would require that executive branch agencies to publish all publicly available information on the internet in a timely fashion. Freeing government information from its paper silos provides the private sector with raw material to develop new products and services and gives the public what they need to participate in government as active and informed citizens. Imagine a law like that here in Ohio or in Cleveland. Public equals online. The scale of the kind of projects that I've been describing may seem enormous, and they are big undertakings, but that should be no deterrent to the power and the pursuit of data transparency, any transparency at the state and local level as well. Sunlight has already started to build out a few platforms that would be usable in a state like Ohio. Through a site called opengovernment.org, which is a joint Sunlight and Participatory Politics Foundation project, citizens can hone in on their state legislative activities, and it is only in 6 states at the moment, and unfortunately Ohio is not one of them yet. You can track bills, you can track votes and lawmakers, you can link up with other people who are interested in monitoring the same topics. You can comment on legislation and contact your representatives. Although almost all states make their legislation available online, more often than not, they publish it in a way, in a format that's pretty useless for the average citizen to use, or really even for machine-readable formats, and in places on the web that you're likely never to go. But we think it should be easy for the citizens of Ohio or California or Louisiana, just as we have made it easy for anyone to follow federal legislation in this way at our website called opencongress.org. This is a website that gets 500,000 visitors a month, every month in a normal time. Who knew when we built this that people would be so intensely interested in federal legislation? And we project that people will be just as interested at the state level. We gather the data for this opengovernment.org site, or the series of them, from states and publish it in common formats with the help of our peers. Developers throughout the country are actually volunteering to help open up their states, and their work is paying off. Right now, we have data available for 30 states, and we just haven't yet had the resources to build out the access to that data for beyond the 6 states where it's now operating. But success in this endeavor, like so many projects in transparency and open government, relies on community participation. We could chastise our governments for not doing this work for us, and we do plenty of that. We could do it for not releasing the data, the legislative data we want, or for properly disclosing spending and budget information in the formats that we want. But that alone will not make the changes we need happen any faster. Instead, we need to take on some of this responsibility ourselves. And by us, I mean the community of Americans who are concerned about accountability for our government. And that's actually a lot of us. Perhaps a little Douglas Adams seems appropriate to bring up at this point, because it illustrates so well the current status of transparency at most levels of government. So in this scene, Arthur, our hero, meets the public servant, Mr. Prosser. And Mr. Prosser says, "But the plans were on display." And Arthur responds, "On display? I had to go down to the cellar to find them." "That is the display department." "With a torch?" Arthur says. "Ah, well, the lights had probably gone. So had the stairs." "But you found the notice, didn't you?" "Yes," said Arthur. "Yes, I did. It was on display in the bottom of the locked filing cabinet, stuck in a disused lavatory, with a sign on the door saying, "Beware of the leopard." It holds all too true for searching most government documents. In the last few years, great strides in transparency have been made at the city level, thanks to a community of concerned activists, government workers, and others who've been working in the same city or across state lines to share best practices. A prime example of this sort of community-driven local progress is San Francisco. In 2009, San Francisco became the first city in the U.S. to issue an executive directive for open government. With this directive, then Mayor Gavin Newsom created a structured one-stop database for all city data called sf.org. Capitalizing on their natural community of technologists, activists, and geeks, San Francisco was able to not just provide data, but to support citizen use of that data through apps contests and through the first city-owned and city-focused store for smartphone applications. There you can find citizen apps like the much-heralded Mom Map, which highlights kid-friendly locations, or one called Echo Finder, the ultimate resource for local recycling. But open government isn't achieved when apps are created. To generate an open process for constructive citizen participation and problem solving, activists and city officials need to talk with each other, need to set priorities, discuss what's really needed. So activists in San Francisco organized a city camp, an unconference, the kind of which are being held all over the country, and relies on the participants themselves to set the agenda and to actively participate with one another to problem solve issues with local government and community organizations. The first camp in San Francisco was held last year and got high participation from civic groups and citizens, and a decent turnout from the government. Mayor Newsom himself made a guest appearance. But just last year, the city of San Francisco itself hosted the event, drawing together over 100 people from the office of San Francisco's Department of Technology, a brand new government entity that shows for the government a certain kind of commitment to using technology as a tool for transparency. But a cautionary point here. Opening up an office doesn't mean that government is any more transparent, but it does indicate the kind of cultural shift that's necessary about the way government thinks about accessibility to its information, a shift for citizens in the way citizens think about their relationship to government. San Francisco is setting a new bar for local open government, integrating government support for open data initiatives with civic participation and accountability, active use of government tools, and participation in public critique and decision-making. But this techno-utopia in California is not the only example of open government activity in the country. Transparency groups working in Albany, New York, or Denver, Colorado, know that not all governments are prepared, technically or otherwise, to take the leap into online disclosure and more in-depth citizen engagement. So these groups are crafting model executive orders and legislation to guide their states and cities into the process. In Salt Lake City, Utah, civic leaders, joined by journalists, activists, and others, took on transparency the old-fashioned way by gathering in front of the State House to protest the repeal of one of Utah's open public records laws. In fact, the only freedom of information law in the country that was applied to a legislature. Public outcry was followed by a bipartisan working group filled with members of the public, new and traditional media, lawmakers, and staff from the governor's office to craft a public update to that bill. City camps, too, have been a driving force for change, held all across the country, indeed across the world, from Raleigh, North Carolina, to St. Petersburg, Russia. These camps connect hundreds of citizens and officials together, lowering bureaucratic barriers and encouraging a meaningful exchange of skills and ideas between the governing and the governed. It's in the spirit that City Camp organizers, in the spirit of City Camp, that organizers here in Cleveland are working on the Transparency Action Plan Summit coming up July 29th and 30th. Cleveland has certainly had its fair share of scandals this year, many of which are identical to things that are happening in cities around the country. But this is not the moment to give in to cynicism and say it will always be this way. This is the moment, actually, to take up the tools that are out there and use them for transparency here at home, to spur innovation, to lower walls and open doors, for government to enable citizens to participate freely in democracy through technology, and for citizens to take responsibility for helping government become the open, accountable system they want it to be. We are at the beginning of a critical swing from the one-way, top-down, highly controlled relationship of the past, where government information was routinely withheld and classified, to one where the default position is going to be openness. And with increased transparency, I think we have a chance of increasing trust in our democracy, in our institutions, and in our politicians. The philosopher Archimedes once said, "Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I will move the world." In a democracy, each of us has leverage over the process and places to stand and be counted. And even though some of the actors have inordinate leverage over the democratic process due to their disproportionate access to information and resources. But this is now starting to change. The internet and new communications technologies are opening up the process to many more voices and leveling the playing field. Millions of people are participating directly in self-organizing, powerful new forces for greater openness and accountability. By expanding public access to the real data of public life and government, we are joining and fostering deeper trends running throughout the entire world. We know we still have a lot of work to do, but we are heartened because we know that we are swimming with the forward tide of history. Thank you very much.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a Friday forum featuring Ellen Miller, co-founder and executive director of the Sunlight Foundation. We will return to our speaker in a minute for the traditional City Club question and answer period. We would encourage you to go ahead and formulate your questions now, and please keep your questions brief. The City Club, as was mentioned earlier, will turn 100 years old in 2012. And as we prepare for a year of celebration, we hope you'll join us in one of the many activities we are planning for our centennial year. And we hope that you'll support us financially to secure the next 100 years of civic discourse. We welcome all of you here today live and those listening to WCPN 90.3 FM, WCLV, WTAM, or one of the many radio stations across the country. Our television broadcast partner is WVIZ PBS Idea Stream. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. We're pleased to welcome guests at tables hosted by Baker Hostetler, the Citizens League of Greater Cleveland, the Civic Commons, the Cleveland Coalition, Cuyahoga County Democratic Party, and purpleamerica.org. Thank you for joining us today. Now we'd like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from all of you, including guests. Holding the microphone today is City Club intern Joe Andre, and program director Carrie Miller. First question, please.
How you doing? My first question is, you're talking about making government transparent to the masses of people. Well, but we can tell by the recent vote, especially in the state of Ohio, that the lack of participation among voters, as far as in the general election, even if it's an off year of presidential election. How do you propose, as far as educating the masses of people not being so apathetic if they don't come out and vote, but how so to be aware of what's going on with their government around them, if it's local government, but city government, state government, or even federal government? How do you propose, educating people about this? Yeah. About this information?
A great question. I think, for Sunlight, my first default in the answer is the potential of technology, smartphones in particular, web access through libraries, through schools, through personal computers, has become sort of the vehicle through which to educate. But when I say to educate, that sounds very one way and very top down. It has become, the technology has allowed us to interact with people, to ask communities what they would like, how they need to understand issues. So we see it happening in little neighborhoods all around the country where there are, neighborhood listservs, and people are saying, there's garbage on my street, or the pickup, the garbage trucks never come to my neighborhood. Or, who's the city councilman responsible for that? So, in a way, all politics is local, and the technology, I think we just have to get better at the technology that is already in people's hands, using that as a way to distribute information, engage people, and ask them what they really want. So it's not, there's no audience anymore. We often describe a group like this as the people formerly known as the audience, because, well, here at the City Club, you can stand up and ask a question. You're now a participant with us. That's what's happening online as well. People are coming to the Twitter accounts of members of Congress or to their Facebook pages and saying, I have a question for you right now. Tell me what the answer to this is. And so we're finding much more engagement that way. And I think the secret to this is finding the ways to get the information from the government that is useful to people, whether it's about trash pickup, or it's about school budgets, or it's about jobs, or waiting lines, or prices at gas stations. Find what people really do want to know, and make sure that they have the information that's available to them. It's a technical task. It takes people and developers to do that. Sunlight is actually now developing, for the first time, a series of they'll be mostly mobile apps. They're designed to be used by mobile apps, and it's supported by the Knight Foundation, using government data that is more what we refer to as consumer-facing. So we're about to release an app that has healthcare data. Where do I find a senior facility for my father, for my mother? The doctor has asked me to take X medicine. What are alternative brands for that? This is all government data that we're pulling in. We're mashing it together, allowing for searches, and it will be available on your phone. We're looking at consumer banking information as the next one of these public-facing apps, and perhaps one on environmental issues as well. We have to get better at figuring out what people really want to know, and use that as a way to engage people, and the technology allows us to do that in a way that we've never been able to do before.
Ms. Miller, you have had played a very important role in exposing the effect of money upon politics. And we've already started in 2011 on the 2012 presidential campaign. It's estimated that not only hundreds of millions of dollars will be spent in this campaign, it may run into several billion dollars. The United States Supreme Court, by 5-4 decisions, has declared unconstitutional efforts to limit the spending of money on campaigns. In fact, the last decision it made was to open the door to unlimited contributions by unions and corporations. In view of that 5-4 conservative majority, what do you think the possibilities are of some meaningful type of restrictions upon campaign contributions?
I think in this political climate, adding new restrictions on political contributions is a non-starter. I think the Supreme Court has weighed in. It has said that corporations can spend freely. Many of them will do this through a mechanism through which they do not actually have to report the source of that money. And so we are entering a new era of lack of transparency when it comes to political spending. So that may sound depressing, but one thing that I said earlier is, if we're stuck between, that rock and a hard place, one of them is the Supreme Court and one of them is the Congress that is not that anxious to pass campaign finance reform laws, we have to see what's possible. And what is possible is that there are still quite strong, though not strong enough, disclosure rules, transparency rules for the collection of political money. In fact, still the vast majority of political money is reported. It is not reported as timely as we would like, or with perhaps as much detail as we'd like, but the Federal Election Commission, perhaps the only thing they do well is they collect these reports. They are filed electronically in the House. They are still filed on paper in the Senate. For those candidates, the presidentials file them electronically, I believe, and make that information available to citizens so that citizens themselves can judge whether the money that someone takes for their direct campaign is something they like or they don't like, depending on what positions they're interested in. So that's why we take a lot of the data that's collected, and by colleagues of ours at groups like the Center for Responsive Politics or the Institute on Money and State Politics. Our technologists are very sophisticated. They bring those data sets together into a single database, and you can search, just give me a name of anyone, plug it in, General Electric, and you can see the entire profile of an individual or a corporation, how much they give to state politicians, how much they give to federal politicians, how much they spend on their own lobbyists, which lobbyists do they hire, has this company ever received a grant or contract from the federal government? Has this entity ever been a contractor that's been cited for misconduct? And as we build out this database, which we are doing with more accountability data, the profile that you will get of these donors becomes even more robust and more interesting. I think today about the most we can do, I mean, politically, I think reform legislation of any type is not in the cards in the near term. The most we can do is try to follow the money we can and make it more easily accessible to citizens so they can make the judgments. I do want to add one thing. For all the systems that have been struck down by the courts in the last few years, even this week there was a decision that actually affirmed a public financing system based on matching funds. So that seems to be the only, at the moment, politically viable way to reform the campaign finance system. Sunlight is more focused, or exclusively focused, really, on the transparency aspect of it and making it more easy, making it easier for people to have access to that information.
My name is Dale Miller. I'm a member of the new Cuyahoga County Council, where we recently passed legislation that will require information on all county contracts to be posted on searchable databases online. And my question is, to what extent has the Cuyahoga County's attempts to build a new accountable government from scratch with a new system attracted interest in places as far away as your offices in Washington, D.C.?
Sunlight does not work a lot at the state level yet, but first of all, congratulations on passing that legislation. That's a wonderful step in the right direction so people can understand the grants and contracts that are being made and raise questions. It's a way of engaging citizens. There are many cities and states that are moving in this. This is the forward tide when it comes to how information is made publicly available and accessible. We probably have a wiki someplace at Sunlight Foundation that describes all of the city efforts in this regard, and we could certainly send that to your office and let you know what we know. And if not, we could probably start a wiki page and put right at the top of it, Cuyahoga County, right here, here's what they do. So we'd be glad to either we are tracking it and have some information for you, or we'd be glad to start tracking it.
Good afternoon. I have two questions. I'll make them quick. First of all, there's a group of people who will not see the sunlight, so to speak, because of the lack of technology, and that is our poor. And I'm wondering if they ever come up in your discussions as to how to include them in this participatory government. And my second question is, it's very important for high school students to be involved as citizens. And I'm wondering if you have any components of the organization that reach out to high school students.
Both very, very good questions. I think the answer to your question about the disenfranchised people who do not have access to technology, it's a two-word answer. It's called mobile phones. I Sunlight does a little bit of international work as well, so I'll tell a story because it happened to me when I was overseas. I was, as far as I could tell, in the middle of nowhere in Bangladesh, and I was visiting a program where women were learning about their legal rights. And the person who was escorting us around, the program was over, they were demonstrating to the visitors, and the woman who was introducing and hosting the group of visitors said, I'd like everybody to introduce themselves, and so an informal part of the session began. And all of these women who were as poor as could be, they all pulled out their smartphones and they started taking pictures of us. It was just a remarkable moment. And I need to learn the statistics, but even in the US, or perhaps even more so in the US, the phone has become the instrument of information exchange and communication, particularly among people who do not have web access. And we know about the digital divide, and it's an enormous problem. But we may be able to jump over that, as they have done in third world countries all around the world, that the phone becomes the instrument of communication. Story, Sunlight, of course, predictably has two mobile apps about Congress. The first one was for the iPhone, because that's really cool, and I love my iPhone. And it's kind of an insider tool, and we had no idea how many people would be interested in these kinds of things. And then the geekier guys in the office said, well, we have to do one for the Android platform because that's very open, and Sunlight operates in the open source community. And so we developed a very basic, who is your member of Congress, what bills have they sponsored? Again, this is pretty wonky stuff. Basic, how do I contact my member of Congress? The Android app to date has been downloaded 400,000 times. When I got the statistic last year, it was 300,000 times. And I turned to our senior technologist and I said, who are these people? Who are these 400,000 citizens who want to know more about Congress? I should tell you that our iPhone app, which a member of Congress said to me, oh, now I can get rid of my staff, because it gave him all the inside information. That's only been downloaded about 30,000 times. So that's an astounding number to us. We had no idea how people would use this on their phones. And then I said, all right, I download a lot of apps. Not a lot, but I download some apps. And maybe I'll use them 2 or 3 times, and then I won't ever use them again. So how often are people using our app on the Android? And the answer is between 60 and 80,000 times a week. I find that astounding. So I think that is the answer, and I think which is why we're developing some of these consumer-facing apps really for phones. And there will be a web interface to them, but we don't expect people to use them that way. We expect them to get the information on their phones. High school students, we have not, this is the second time in 2 weeks, actually the last time I was in Chicago, who suggested that we begin to develop a curriculum, perhaps pairing with a news literacy kind of organization. There are many of those around the country, to begin to sort of inject a discussion of technology and transparency into civic literacy understanding by high school students. We do not have a program in that arena. I should tell you that when Sunlight started 5 years ago, we were focusing almost exclusively on Congress and transparency for congressional information. The first thing we did was we made a list of all the reports that Congress was supposed to make and how it was made available, whether it was electronically or still filed on paper. And that was our starting point. Then with the new administration being so focused on government transparency and technology, we expanded our work into the executive branch as well. And from there, we've had many calls and requests from state and state governments, local governments, to work on principles. And so we've done that as well as expanded similarly into the international space. But our heart is still at the federal level. When it comes to money, politics, and influence data, we are reaching quite deeply into the states to try to surface that information and match it to the federal data as well.
Good afternoon. My name is Marnie Sweet. My business is Business Etiquette. And I'm wondering how or whether you have noticed any increase in the civility among politicians as you open up the information, what their response has been. Here in northeastern Ohio, we do have a civility in politics consortium with Akron U. Cleveland State and Mount Union. So I would appreciate comments on that.
Well, we have mixed reactions when we ask government officials, whether they're members of Congress or the executive branch, to open up their information. I mean, they understand that information is power. So do we. And so the very reason we want it, because it gives us power, the power to ask questions, to be better informed, to make better judgments, is the reason they're not so wild about putting it out. So I'll tell you a little bit of a story, which is we had an early campaign. It was called the Punch Clock Campaign, and we asked candidates to promise to put their official calendars online every single day. And we had 99 challengers sign on to this campaign. Only one of them won. We had no incumbents sign on to this campaign, so that tells you the sort of dichotomy here. But the one who won was now a senator from New York, Kirsten Gillibrand. She promised to do this. She has published her calendar every single day since she's been elected. But she's not alone, but she is a trendsetter. So there are a half a dozen members now in the House and Senate who actually publish their calendars online, so you can see who they're meeting with. And I had an opportunity to meet with Senator Gillibrand a couple of weeks ago, and there I was, right in her calendar, which the office, of course, got a huge chuckle out of. But I think there are many members on both sides of the aisle who understand the need for transparency. And we work both with Republicans and Democrats on the Hill to try to move the government in this direction and to improve the quality of the data that's coming out. So I testified last week before the Oversight Chairman Issa's committee, as he's talking about extending the recovery board operation into something that is more extensive and hoping to make it permanent so that we have the kind of data that's coming in about government spending in a consistent way. So a reporter a long time ago said to me, members of Congress, the bad ones, and they're very few, do stuff because they can get away with it. So the more transparent, the more sunlight that is shined on the activities of government, I believe, helps sort of raise the level of expectation. If you know someone's going to watch you, are you really going to throw that Kleenex on the ground? Likely not. So the kinds of things we follow, of course, are more substantial than that, but it's exactly the same purpose. So we think it will increase responsibility and accountability, and indeed potentially civility as well.
My name is Rose M. Allen, and my questions have almost been previously asked, so I'm going to have to do a little bit of a dovetail. But part of it, in your early part of your presentation, you talked about people being able to ask constituents asking why did that legislator vote that way instead of what was in the best interest of constituents. Now that we have a campaign that's probably going to go into the billions in 2012, do you see a pathway beyond the transparency to see where all the money is coming from, but do you see a pathway that will keep the average voters from feeling, well, what's the point in voting? They're only going to pay attention to the people who gave them a lot of money. Is there a pathway to make sure that that doesn't become the political future?
Well, that's certainly been the political past, and I think that speaks to the first questioner's point about how do we get people more engaged. There are all kinds of ways, I think, of engaging citizens. In the last election, some of which have worked for Sunlight and some of which have not worked, so we'll just retool them and do them again. In the last election, we knew that there were all these ads being funded by moneyed sources that we would never know the original source from. And so we set up something called Sunlight Cam, the campaign ad monitor. So if you go to the website, I think we're going to build it out for the mobile this year. If you go to the website, sunlightcam.org, I think, you could list an ad, a television ad that you saw. This is something you do. You're home, you're in the evening. If you have access to a phone, a smartphone, or the website, and we had citizens actually monitoring political advertising, and they couldn't tell whether it was an ad from a super PAC or a C4 or a 527. It was irrelevant to us. We wanted to know where these ads were being broadcast. And we partnered with a media outlet to get this widely distributed. And it didn't work as well as we thought, but we also had sort of, we did two things. We did this citizen engagement platform for people, but we also had funded a study at Wesleyan University, for them to do an academic study of ad buying and ad spending. But the idea was that that study was enriched by what citizens were able to contribute. We've done a lot of work in the area of what we refer to as distributed research, where we ask citizens, so this is a way to get involved, not just on election day. We've asked citizens to help us do research projects. The things that, the first one that we had the idea to do, I actually said, well, how long would it take an intern to do that? And the project was to look at how many members of Congress have their spouses on their payrolls. And somebody said, oh, it would probably take, a week or so. And I said, oh, let's do it as a distributed project. So we created a platform for people. We announced it it was finished on a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock. Of course, I was not happy. Who releases anything on a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock? I said, fine, just put it up. We'll put a press release out on Monday morning. By Sunday at 8 a.m., it was done. Now, I don't know, except for the one person who did the most, how people found it, because we're not a really hugely trafficked site. But they did. They thought it was game-like. They thought it was fun. And they did the research, and it was done, and it was fact-checked. And we released it, Monday or Tuesday of the following week. So I think we're still in this experimental stage of how you engage citizens. We all think from the old world that the way we express our opinion is on election day. This is what we vote yes or no, we vote up or down, and that's it. That's not the way it can be done anymore. We have all of these opportunities, and we're really limited only by our imagination and the ways we get our communities, the way Sunlight develops its tools. And the brilliance of the technology is that some of this may not work, and some of it may work well beyond our expectations, but the price tag for building these kinds of things is not huge. For retooling them is almost nothing until we get it exactly right. I'll give you another example. We have a tool that is called Capital Words, and it searches the congressional record every single day. It scrapes the entire congressional record and analyzes what was the single most frequently spoken word of the day. So there's an algorithm that takes out the A and these, please, no, thanks, etc. And it is unbelievably accurate. And you can sort it by your delegation, you can sort it by state. It's fascinating. And when you begin to actually do some sort of quasi-academic analysis, you really see that certain words appear in election years and certain words appear, in non-election years, and it's absolutely fascinating. So we've had that site down because it wasn't working very well for about 6 months, and we're about ready to put it back up. But people who want to know what's going on in Congress, and you look and you see the words health, care as the two biggest words in a tag cloud, it's an immediate way for people to understand what's going on in Congress on that day. Oh, I'm not supposed to.
Hello, my name is Adam Harvey. My question is in regard to local governments. I think a lot of local governments have a great interest in being more transparent, but they don't necessarily know how to go about it. What advice do you have for them in implementing the policy of transparency at a local level?
Well, there are lots of people who are now moving into this space, particularly at the municipal level. Sunlight has been working with some activists, I believe, in Colorado and in New York. I think I mentioned them earlier, who've been trying to develop some sort of model best practices kinds of things. So we can put you in touch with them. A second thing is that a new organization has just developed called Civic Commons, headed by a friend and colleague of mine named Andrew McLaughlin. They're headquartered in New York. And what they, as I understand, what they are trying to do is to develop platforms that can be used by any city. So sort of neutral platforms that can be picked up, modestly adapted for, say, budget transparency or campaign contribution transparency. So rather than every single city hiring its own, technologists to build something from scrap, then they are trying to develop these platforms that will actually increase the adaptation of technology for various things that cities are interested in. So I urge you, I believe they're civiccommons.org.
It seems that everybody pays at least lip service to transparency and open government, but we live in a hyper-partisan time. And in that environment, it seems easy to imagine when the highest value often seems to be winning a battle of the day or winning an election, that transparency loses out in that kind of fighting. And I'm wondering, though, as you think about the value of transparency and open government throughout American history, whether you agree that the tenor of these times poses any kind of special threat to it, or whether it's just always been so, and that there's always been that tension between a desire for openness and a desire for those in office to control the information and the power.
Yeah, I think that dichotomy, government wanting to keep information closed and the public wanting it open, is an ongoing tension, and it will always be an ongoing tension. The new day that we live in, though, means that citizens themselves can put these tools in their own hands and digest the information, get the information. They don't have to wait on government to do it. We often say, and one of our big supporters in Washington, a newspaper called Washington Examiner, conservative paper, says, if Congress will not do transparency, we will do transparency to them. So we have... You know, there are sort of silly ways to do this. There are ways to do this in which you might get arrested. We've thought of most of those ways. But transparency, what do they talk about all day? Scrape the congressional record and find out what they talk about all day. Participating in writing of rules and regulations. There's now an e-government system. We're now scraping that so we can understand what people are saying in their comments. This is doing transparency to government and to the entities who are the big players. So I think that's the root. What's changed is the technology and what it allows us to do. You know, we could stand outside the doors to the Russell building on the Senate side and take photographs of all the lobbyists. In fact, we have not done that, but we have done this, which is to take photographs of people who sit in committee hearings and put them online and ask people to help us identify them. That is a project that I think was launched this week. Actually, it was quietly launched this week. So again, that's crowdsourcing. That's engaging people. I mean, I bet if I went to a city council hearing here in Cleveland and were taking pictures of the audience, that the people in this room could identify everybody who was sitting in that audience. It's the same. That's doing transparency to them. That's not making any accusations. That's just who attends committee hearings. We don't know whether that project, which we call Congress 180 Degrees, will be successful or not, but it seems like it's worth trying as a creative way to understand who attends hearings and what are they looking, what they might be looking for, and then checking their agendas, then comparing that with their campaign contributions and other money that they might receive from Washington. So yes, there is a constant resistance to this, but the tide, at least in Washington, in part because of this administration's pledge, which they have not fully fulfilled, is it's swinging in a different direction. And I like to think that the genie is out of the bottle with respect to online transparency of government information. I want to believe that's the case. I want to believe that the next president, be a Democrat or a Republican, would not be any less open than this administration has been. I can't say that for certainty, but I do think that the times have changed, that there is a cultural shift in Washington and in state capitals and cities all around the country.
How is Sunlight Foundation funded?
Excellent question. Sunlight Foundation, as I mentioned, we just celebrated our 5th anniversary. Our largest supporter is the Omidyar Network, based in California, and this is the foundation or the network really associated with Pierre Omidyar, the founder of eBay, and they have been our largest supporter to date. Our second largest supporter has been our co-founder, Mike Klein, a Washington-based businessman and lawyer who I just met just before the founding of Sunlight, and we both sort of conspired together to sort of say what would be new here, what needed to be done, particularly talking with journalists. We've had a large contract from the Pew Charitable Trust to do a database, which is a Pew project actually, called Subsidy Scope. So we've been trying to track all government subsidies. No one's ever done that before. The Knight Foundation is a very large supporter of the Sunlight Foundation. And unlike most organizations, we list all of our supporters on our website to every penny that they have given to us. So at sunlightfoundation.com, you can find the rest of them. But those are the biggest supporters. I hope I haven't left anyone out.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we've been listening to a Friday forum featuring Ellen Miller, co-founder and executive director of the Sunlight Foundation. Thank you, Ms. Miller. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned. That's great.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.